Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at the current edition of the North Coast Journal. My name is Matt, and I'll be your Dave for today. Joining us, as always, or as usual, is Thad Greenson, the news editor of the North Coast Journal, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, who is the arts and features editor of the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing okay, under the circumstances. I've been thrown into action again, but we'll see what happens.
We appreciate your willingness to always step in, always pick up the charge.
You know, I do what I can in my own limited fashion. So let's crack on. Let's take a look at what's in the big book this week. And we'll start with the cover story. Thad, what is on the cover of the North Coast Journal this week?
Yeah, this week we have a story from digital editor Kimberly Weir looking at the prospect of sea otters returning to the North Coast, returning to the coast off Humboldt County, where they have been virtually non-existent, pretty much extinct for decades.
The folks on the radio can't see the cover, but if they did, cuteness overload.
Indeed. I was going to say it was just all a vehicle for getting that cute photo on the cover. That was most of the reason for the season.
Shout out to Kim, by the way, for actually researching and interviewing people rather than just looking at adorable videos of otters online, which is the temptation.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about this. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but let's just briefly talk about Kim's article and what the proposition is for the return of the sea otter.
Yeah, so essentially the sea otter had been kind of hunted to extinction through much of the coastal United States, and due to its kind of luxurious pelts that were a big deal in the fur trade way back when, and so the sea otter population exists in kind of two cohorts, one in Southern California and one up north by Alaska. And both the cohorts are fairly small, and there's some concern about kind of their long-term viability, especially the southern cohort, because it's really localized, exists in a really small area, and there's concern that if there were some kind of localized catastrophe like a oil spill or something like that, it could really decimate the population. There's also some kind of concern about its genetic variation, because again, it is a fairly small cohort that all came from a group of about 50 otters that popped up there at some point. And so the Centers for Biological Diversity has actually petitioned the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife to move forward with a reintroduction program. And if there's numerous studies that need to be undertaken to decide whether it's the agency is really going to take the step, but if it does, the coast off Humboldt and Mendocino County presents an attractive kind of target area. And one of the reasons for that is while otters have been virtually non-existent in our waters for some time, there have been several sightings in recent years. One of a live otter just kind of playing around off the jetty a handful of years back, and then two of deceased otters washing up in Humboldt County. And so there's some hope that they would be viable here. Reintroduction efforts elsewhere have been successful. And so there's the feeling that if they were able to reintroduce them here, that it would actually serve as kind of a bridge population between the northern population up by Alaska and the one down south. And that could make it an attractive location for such an effort.
Now, there was nothing, I didn't catch any of this in the article, but, you know, when sea otters have not exactly been popular with fishermen, shall we say, and there was a time when there might have been opposition to this kind of reintroduction. Is there any hint of that, or is just everybody super happy that the otter's coming back?
I think we are too early in the process to really see that kind of formalized opposition. Although there is, the folks that Kim talked to with the Department of Fish and Wildlife were certainly, saying that they recognize that there would be community outreach would have to be done, and the commercial fishing fleets locally would be one target of said outreach. Another concern that is present with the otter reintroduction is Kim has written a lot for us about kind of the decimation of the bull kelp forests off of Humboldt's coast, which is due to this kind of explosion in purple urchins, and the combination of those two have really imperiled the red abalone population here. And so there is some hope that with sea otter reintroduction, sea otters eat both abalone and sea urchins, or the purple urchins, and so there's some hope that if otters weren't reintroduced here, they would just feast on this purple urchin abundance off our coast and clean them out, which would really, be a good step toward allowing those bull kelp forests to grow back up and kind of restoring that marine ecosystem. But there is also the fear that maybe for some reason they wouldn't feast on these kind of almost starving purple urchins and would instead go after the few abalone that are left and decimate that population into extinction. So there are some question marks for sure.
Well, there's a lot of details in Kim's article, and people ought to take a look at it.
There
Absolutely.
it is.
So next up is Eureka Town Hall concerning mental health. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was. We ran a story about the first of its kind town hall meeting on mental health, which was dubbed Mental Health 101, hosted by the city of Eureka and Mayor Kim Burgell. And the hope is that this will be, the first in quarterly meetings focused on various aspects of mental health services in Humboldt County, which Mayor Burgell has is really, I think, rightfully identified as kind of a crucial topic for the city and the county moving forward. And so this story was kind of, this meeting was kind of designed as a place setter to kind of set the table, hear from members of the public about their experience accessing mental health services in Humboldt County, and then also hear from a number of kind of subject matter expert professionals. So it featured Leah Nagy from the National Alliance for Mental Illness, Mark Lammers from the Department of Health and Human Services, Mental Health Branch, Commander LaFrance from the Eureka Police Department's CSET team, which is kind of its homeless outreach team. And I thought they all brought a lot of interesting things to the table, and it was, as is the case with these kinds of conversations, it was rather meandering. A lot of people were sharing their, just their own personal experiences. But I think the meeting kind of zeroed in on, really the challenges and reverberating impacts of trying to deal with acute mental health issues in a state where it is really, really hard to mandate people into treatment. California, I think a lot of people would say rightfully has a really, strong laws as far as what it takes to medicate or institutionalize somebody against their will. And a large part of, I think, the issues that Humboldt County faces is what to do with folks who don't meet that criteria, but still maybe, don't believe they have a mental illness or are unable to kind of contain the impacts of that, and how to reach those people and help those people.
Now, I noticed that one of the things that's being proposed, and I think something that has worked elsewhere, is the concept of mental health courts.
Yes, that's something that all the panelists seem to think has, has the real potential to do some good here. And the idea there is that, as I was talking about it provides a means to get folks who maybe wouldn't go on their own volition into a treatment program. It gives them kind of an incentive to do so. And the idea is that folks who wind up in the criminal justice system, as many mentally ill folks locally do, and are charged with a crime, they would have the option basically of, instead of going through the criminal justice process and instead of going in potentially potentially going to jail or prison would instead agree to go to a program, whether it be outpatient or inpatient, and the specifics of that, would be case specific, but it would give them, that option. And then provided that they continue on in the program, they do well, they meet the kind of checks along the way that are required, that the court requires, then at the end of that, the court would dismiss the charge against them, and it wouldn't be a criminal conviction. And so, some folks feel like that really has the potential to provide an incentive for certain people to address kind of their unmet mental health needs.
And then also under discussion is, the perennial endemic lack of resources. I think Sempervirens has like 16 beds, and then St. Joe's, I think, has another 12 mental health beds. And so that really doesn't seem like it's a lot, and there just is a lack of resources that seem to be missing from this equation.
And that's really the through line here with so many of these efforts, that the reason that a mental health court, diversion court hasn't been launched here yet is apparently because the presiding judge in the Superior Court feels like there isn't the infrastructure in place to do it. They don't have enough licensed psychiatrists and clinical professionals to mandate people into these programs because the programs don't exist. And so, and then similarly, we heard from Public Defender Luke Brownfield, who talked about the efforts his office is making on behalf of its criminal clients, who said a majority of whom are suffering from some sort of mental illness, and that he said that they have hired one social worker for the office, which he said has been a huge step and has done a lot of good, but it's one person with hundreds of clients. And I think similarly, we see that with case managers and outpatient mental health services in Humboldt County, and so many other aspects that resources and, both the resources allocating the money to hire these professionals, but then also just finding the professionals to hire, even when the money's there, are both tremendous challenges.
Well, there's a lot of good detail in that article as well. I suggest people check that out. But we're going to move on to a couple of breaking stories. And why don't you tell us about those?
Yeah. The first is we ran a story about the Fortuna Police Department looking for a suspect in a skimming case, and kind of warning the public that this is going on. And this was just interesting to me because when I first heard it, I had to Google the term skimming. I had no idea what it meant. But apparently this has been a big problem in more urban areas for some years now. But it is kind of the epidemic of thieves putting kind of a digital apparatus on the card readers at gas stations. So on the gas pump, when you swipe your card, a lot of times there's something that protrudes from the pump that has a slot that you put your card in. Well, apparently folks can buy these things that go over those, just fit right over them. And if you're not looking carefully, nothing looks amiss, and you skim your card, you put your card in to pay, and it registers at the pump, but then this apparatus on top of that actually takes your credit card information. And then these folks, take all this credit card information that they glean from these gas pumps, and then they either sell it on the dark web, according to the Fortuna Police Department, or they actually buy these other machines that they can use to create fake debit and credit cards, and then go try to use your card at an ATM machine or a local establishment. So my interest in writing the story was really just kind of letting people know that, hey, this is a thing, and people should try to protect themselves against it. Apparently, using the chip reader function, there's no skimming option for that. So that's the safest thing, or just paying in cash. Just got to try to stay one step ahead, Jen.
Right. So what would people be on the lookout for if they were to encounter something like this? What would be, is there some sort of telltale sign, or is there a look, or how would they know that a gas pump or some other device had been compromised?
So it's really hard. The detective at the Fortuna Police Department said, look for if there's any sticker seals on the internal workings of the gas pump for the door to access that. If that's broken, that's a warning sign. If there's any kind of pry marks around where you would open up to get in, or if there's anything that seems amiss about the card reader slot itself. Those are things to kind of be leery about. But for example, in the Fortuna one, they actually used a different technology where they accessed the internal workings of the gas pump and put a device in there. And so just from looking at the pump or expecting the pump, nobody would have ever had any reason to think anything was amiss. So again, the guys at the Fortuna Police Department were saying, really for now, the fail-safe way is to use that chip reader as opposed to the magnetic strip on your card, or just go inside and pay with the teller and pay in cash.
Caveat emptor, I guess, is the buyer beware.
Indeed.
And so second one, the second breaking news story is Operation Bails Away. Why don't you tell us a little
this
bit
just
about that?
crossed my desk a couple days ago. I found out that the sheriff's office and some other local agencies were kind of hard at work trying to figure out a way to get hay to starving cattle in southern Humboldt. And so the short of it is that we're having so many impacts from these winter storms. County actually just declared a state of emergency today. There's a new tidbit of breaking news for you, but one of these impacts was that a lot of the expansive ranches down in southern Humboldt were rendered inaccessible by snow and downed trees and stuff like that. And so as the snow failed to melt away over days and then into a week, some of these ranchers became fairly frantic about the state of their cattle. And of course, when there's several inches of snow accumulated on the ground, the cows can't graze either. And so I guess Second District Supervisor Michelle Bushnell's phone started, blowing up late last week and over the weekend with calls from dozens of ranchers really concerned about the state of their cattle. And one of them remembered something like this happened 40 years ago, or almost, in 1989, and that the Coast Guard had actually contributed a solution by flying in and airdropping bales of hay to these herds. And so he asked, could something like this be done now? And so she called Sheriff William Hansel and asked him, and he was like, I don't know, but let's find out. And so got on the phone with the Coast Guard and with CAL FIRE, and both of them, they need to do some kind of procedural protocol workarounds in order to do this, because it doesn't fit in CAL FIRE or the Coast Guard's kind of mission by letter, but they were able to do that and have spent several days now running hay from Rohnert Airport to these remote ranches in southern Humboldt to drop off to cows in need. Story of various agencies coming together to think creatively to fix a problem.
Something that the Coasties never thought that they would do when they signed up, I imagine.
I don't think so. There's some very cute photos of Coasties posing in their helicopter with bales of hay in the background.
Nice. All right. And they're probably wearing overalls as well. Okay. Well, that's really great. Thank you for the information on that. Important stuff. So let's turn to the Arts and Features beat. And Jennifer, what do you have for us this week?
First of all, I cannot believe you walked out of that story without a cow pun.
I rack my brain, and I just couldn't come up with one. I'm sorry, I'm a failure.
Next week.
I'll get it as soon as we're done here. I will come up with one.
It's going to ping on my phone. So this week, Dorana Banker-Gilkey, who is reviewing all kinds of theater stuff for us, went to go and see Bull in a China Shop. And Bull in a China Shop is, for one thing, a cool play that is like mostly a two-hander, as they say, or about the relationship between Mary Woolley and Jeanette Marks. And these are women who, in the late 1800s, were kind of fighting, they were in love, they were arguing, they were trying to wrestle with kind of the early roots of feminism and oppression of women. And it was a whole big wild exchange between these two really fearsome minds, right? And when she went to go see it, the lights went out and then didn't come back on. So there was a blackout on the opening night. And so part of her review is kind of talking about, she did get to go back and see the whole thing, and as a bonus, get to see the performer talk back. But along with enjoying this play, which she goes on to say is really great, and the actors do a really fantastic job. Caroline Needham and Natasha White as Wooly and Marks are just phenomenal. And it's a very, like, you know, sometimes it's quite intense. It's based on the letters between these two women. And, you know, there's just really great writing, and they really deliver on it. And everybody else in the cast also does a great job. But Durana also wanted to talk about how the blackout was handled. And at one point she says, you know, this is a really beautiful community. The lights went out, and at some point the folks in the audience were kind of waiting, and they were like, okay, let's see what happens, And the stage manager comes out and says, listen, these lights aren't coming back on. And apparently some of the audience members were like, it's cool, we'll hold up our phones so y'all can see. And but that's not safe, right? That's probably not union. So anyway, they ended up figuring out how to get everybody their tickets or refunds or, you know, rain checks and such. And Durana was really struck not only by kind of the sweetness of a small theater moment, but also, you know, by how open everybody in the audience was to just like, yeah, we'll work around it. We want to see this, and we want to. It became sort of a community moment, which is lovely. You know, you think about what would happen if Coachella all of a sudden stopped, right? There are no riots here. It's just like a tiny theater full of people who just wanted to see, like at Redwood Curtain, it's a tiny theater. Have you been in there?
I have not, no.
It is so small. If you have to get up and like answer a phone call or something, you don't want it to be there. Believe me, you do not want your phone ringing in there. It is like,
they'll know it's you.
Oh my God. It's like a tiny classroom, really. But it's such a small space between you and the actors. And, you know, when people talk about intimate theater, this is intimate theater. So anyway, she had a really wonderful bunch of things to say about the actors, about the play, and also about, you know, how both theater people, you know, who are putting on these plays and things, and the audiences kind of came together in this weird, very Humboldt moment, because apparently we're doing blackouts now, right?
We should throw in here that this is directed by Carol Lang, who's a perennial Access Humboldt, longtime Access Humboldt contributor, and just all around great gal.
And she does some very cool stuff with the set, and, you know, it's a period piece. And so there are lots of period costumes that kind of show you the passage of time throughout. But there's also a screen. I don't want to spoil too much, but she does some innovative things using technology through this play too, which is very cool.
Well, we can be thankful, given the title, that nobody airdropped any hay into the production.
That's true. It is called By the Horns, because, you know, bull in a china shop, which apparently refers to Wooly's character. She is the more, shall we say, bullish of the two.
Not an actual bull, but an incredible simulation. In the couple of minutes that we have left,
yes.
You also have an on the table.
Hey, good news. All the times you've walked by the Ritz and thought, oh, that's a shame because it's been closed for, let me check my notes, 10,000 years. It has been empty forever. It's been empty since before the pandemic. So that's 10,000 years. It's open again. And it is, surprise, surprise, called the Ritz.
Nice.
Which is kind of fun because the building's nostalgia kind of overrides quite a bit, right? In talking to the new owner of the place, who is Concha Alvarado, who owns it with her husband, Jose Licona, and his brother is actually the chef working in the back, Fernando Licona. we talked about how, she kind of fell in love with the bar. She ran Calico's in Garberville for 6 years, which recently closed, and moved up here. So what we have now in Eureka, for those of you who are in this part of Humboldt, is basically the Calico menu and chef and everything in the Ritz, now at this gorgeous bar that she fell in love with. They have a full liquor license, so they thought, yeah, we got to take advantage of this. And if you haven't been inside the Ritz, because as I said, it has been closed for 10,000 years, it has the most gorgeous, you think it's Art Deco, but it's in fact streamlined modern. Just like the Eureka Theater up the street. If you want to read more about that style, go back and read Gabrielle Gopineff's wonderful story on the architecture of the Eureka Theater. It's a good one. But that style that we see hasn't been there forever. The Eureka Theater started out that way. 1939, they opened that puppy up and it looked just like it looks now, basically. But this building, the Ritz building, was originally built in the 19-teens, and it was a Victorian. It had all the little gingerbready bits and the little bay window, sort of like turret-like thing out front. And for a while, it was a Woolworths. And then I wonder if it had a sandwich counter. My first question. And then it turned into this modern thing, this, art moderne or streamlined modern style in 1946. So
okay.
I'm dying to go back and look at newspaper articles to see if people were like, no, you're ruining it. You're destroying it. Because now if you change the way the Ritz looked, everybody would be just rending their clothing in the streets. But this iconic building, now you can go back inside and have a drink there. And true to the Ritz's latest incarnations, which were, what was there, like a French Thai place. There was a hot pot and cheese and chocolate fondue place. So just like dipping things all over. When you go back and look at the old Yelp reviews, people are like, we had the pizza and the duck dumplings. It's been wild in there for a minute. So not so strange that the new menu is actually a triple threat of cuisines. It has a sandwich and burgers section, a whole restaurant's worth of Mexican food options, and a whole restaurant's worth of Italian options. So take your pick, and also bar food, of course.
Of course. And soon to be the favorite watering hole of the staff of the North Coast Journal, I'm sure.
It is right across the street.
Yeah. Well, thanks for...
Location.
Yeah. All important. Well, thank you for that, Jennifer. And that's about all the time we have for our North Coast Journal preview this week. The North Coast Journal is on newsstands right now. Go out and get a copy, get several copies, hand them out to your friends. You can also find the North Coast Journal online. Thad and Jennifer, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you again next week.